The sound came suddenly, like a ripple on a perfectly still lake. Late one night, as Earth's orbital network maintained its steady vigil, a new transmission breached the usual cosmic hum. It wasn't the first time someone had picked up a stray signal from the void. Usually, such anomalies turned out to be pulsar interference, solar flares, or simple human error. But this was different. The signal didn't repeat in a simple pattern. It was jagged, an erratic chain of bursts and pauses that defied the usual signs of natural origin. Even stranger, it emerged not from a known star system, but from an area of space that should have been silent, a cold, empty swath of the galactic plane with no history of known transmissions. The closest astronomical objects were a few scattered rogue planets drifting through the black, utterly incapable of producing such complex frequencies. At first, no one took it seriously. The initial reaction was dismissal. Even as the astronomers on duty at the Paris Astrophysics Center recorded the transmission, they assumed it was a malfunction in their equipment. Yet when the signal persisted through multiple observatories and different instruments, the doubts began to grow. Within hours, research teams across the world were scrambling to verify the source. At the Polaris Institute in Seattle, Dr. Rin Hart and her team worked around the clock to isolate the signal's characteristics. Rin wasn't a celebrity scientist. She was known mainly among her peers as the woman who had catalogued anomalies from the far edge of the Kuiper Belt. To her, the signal felt deliberate. Unlike the random chaos of natural phenomena, this message, if it could be called that, had layers. Each burst seemed to overlap another, creating a cascade of interwoven tones that defied standard pattern recognition software. After nearly 3 days of non-stop analysis, her team managed to strip away the interference. What emerged was a tightly packed series of coordinates that, when charted, pointed to a distant region of space far beyond any known colony or trading route. But it wasn't just a map. Embedded within the signal was a second set of data. At first, it looked like static. But when Rin's colleague, data engineer Marcus Wu, filtered it through a harmonic resonance model, the pattern revealed a sequence of instructions. "What are these supposed to do?" Marcus asked, leaning over the console. He wiped at his eyes, bloodshot from the last 48 hours of work. Rin stared at the pattern on the screen. "It's a frequency protocol. It looks like it's designed to boost the signal and send it right back." She paused, frowning. "But these frequencies, they're way beyond what our transmitters normally handle. And the power levels are through the roof," Marcus finished. "It's like they're asking us to burn half the grid just to answer." It was an absurd request. Transmissions at that strength were typically reserved for catastrophic emergencies or planet-wide announcements. And yet, the instructions were clear. Whoever or whatever had sent the signal had included precise steps for humanity to respond. Against protocol, against reason, and against his better judgment, Marcus couldn't resist a simple test. Without consulting Rin, he ran the protocol through the lab's low-power simulator. The harmless pulse that came back confirmed it. The data wasn't a glitch or an error. It was real. A meeting with the International Oversight Committee was convened, but the gears of bureaucracy turned slowly. The signal continued, growing weaker by the day, as scientists debated whether to act. Then, on a quiet Tuesday night, Marcus made his choice. He was the only one in the lab when he uploaded the frequency profile into the facility's high-power transmitter. The faint hum of the equipment grew into a deep, resonant thrum. A short, sharp pulse of energy shot out toward the stars, traveling faster than he could imagine. When Rin stormed in minutes later, it was too late. The signal had been answered. "What have you done?" she demanded. Her face was pale, her voice trembling with anger and something else, fear. Marcus was still at the console, staring at the now blank screen. He shook his head. "I just wanted to know if it was real." Rin's hands clenched into fists. "We don't even know what it is, Marcus. That signal could mean anything. It could be a distress call, a warning hell, it could be a trap. And you just answered it?" Before he could respond, the facility's lights flickered. A low, unfamiliar hum vibrated through the walls. At first, they thought it was a power surge. But then the ground beneath them trembled, not from anything terrestrial, but from something far above. As the two scientists raced outside, the night sky was already changing. High above, the faint shimmer of stars was no longer steady. The constellations seemed to shift. At first, it looked like a trick of the atmosphere, but as their eyes adjusted, they saw the truth. Something was coming. In the cavernous World Defense Council chambers buried beneath layers of steel and concrete in Geneva, the atmosphere was one of barely contained panic. Representatives from every major nation and colony sat around the great circular table, their faces projected onto shimmering holographic panels. Outside the sealed room, the streets buzzed with rumors of strange movements in the sky and unexplained power outages. But in here, the only sounds were tense whispers and the occasional clink of glass as aides refilled water for diplomats whose hands were starting to shake. Chairwoman Violetta Langley struck the gavel, her expression stony. Order. This council is now in session. We have a single agenda. How do we respond to the imminent arrival of this she paused, struggling for the right word extraterrestrial fleet. She let the last two words hang in the air. The council chamber, a bastion of negotiation and measured discussion, felt more like a war room. The once unthinkable had become a pressing reality, and now the fate of billions depended on the decisions made in this room. The first voice to rise above the murmurs belonged to Ambassador Hideo Nakamura of the Japanese Pacific Alliance. We must attempt communication immediately, he said, his tone steady but urgent. We've confirmed the transmission came from them. There's no reason to assume their intentions are hostile. If we respond calmly diplomatically, we can avoid unnecessary conflict. A chorus of agreements rippled through a section of the table, particularly among the European Union bloc. Peaceful negotiation was their preferred approach, even in the face of overwhelming uncertainty. The prospect of war, especially with an unknown, potentially superior species, was a scenario they wanted to avoid at all costs. But then came the counterarguments. General Mariana Ortega, the chief military representative for the Pan-American Defense Treaty, stood from her seat, her uniform immaculate, her face sharp with intensity. We can't wait for their actions to define ours. We don't know what their signal really meant. We don't know what technology they have, or why they're coming here. And we certainly don't know if they can even be reasoned with. I say we prepare for the worst. You mean war, retorted Nakamura, narrowing his eyes. Preemptive hostility could seal our fate. We should be showing them we're not a threat, not provoking them further. We're already past that point, Ortega shot back. The moment that transmission was sent, we invited them here. If they're coming as aggressors, we need to be ready to defend our planet. We need to mobilize Earth's Death Fleet. The room fell silent at the words. Earth's Death Fleet, a term that had long been more myth than reality. Many of the council members had only heard rumors, a hidden armada, outfitted with humanity's most advanced AI-controlled weaponry, capable of devastating entire star systems. It was an option born of the darkest scenarios, a card never meant to be played. Until now. We don't even know what the Death Fleet is fully capable of, Nakamura argued, his voice rising. It's a last resort. The council agreed that its use would only be considered in the gravest of existential threats. We don't even know if these beings mean us harm. You've seen the reports, Ortega said, her voice hardening. We've all seen the data. Their fleet is unlike anything we've ever encountered. They're fast, coordinated, and heavily armed. They haven't answered any of our attempts to reach out. If we sit on our hands waiting for them to explain themselves, it might be too late. If they reach Earth and their first act is hostile, we'll lose everything. That's conjecture. Nakamura shouted, slamming his palm on the table. You want to gamble with all of humanity's future based on incomplete intelligence? And you want to gamble that they come in peace when every piece of data we have says otherwise? Ortega shot back. The argument spiraled into a chaotic back and forth. Factions formed in real time, some advocating for immediate military mobilization, others pleading for more time to establish a peaceful dialogue. The chairwoman, weary but unyielding, raised her voice above the din. "Enough!" Langley barked, silencing the chamber. She massaged her temples before speaking again. "The stakes couldn't be higher, and we must decide now. We don't have the luxury of weeks or even days. That fleet is approaching, and every second we delay makes our options fewer." She looked around the room, her eyes locking onto each representative's image. "We need a vote. Do we activate the Death Fleet and prepare for war, or do we extend one final attempt at diplomacy before it's too late?" The room descended into an uneasy silence as the representatives prepared to cast their ballots. Holographic screens flickered, showing a live tally as votes were submitted. It was an agonizing few minutes that felt like hours. The chamber held its breath, the weight of history pressing down on every individual. When the tally appeared on the main display, the decision was clear. Humanity's leaders, in their fear and desperation, had chosen the path of strength. The Death Fleet was to be activated. Admiral Kira Denon wasn't in the council chambers when the final vote passed. She was exactly where she preferred to be, on the bridge of her command ship, the Ardent Star, stationed deep within the shadow of Titan. From this vantage point, she could see Earth as a distant, faint blue dot, barely more than a suggestion of life against the vast black backdrop of the universe. She'd spent decades out here long enough that she sometimes felt more at home among the stars than on the planet she was tasked with defending. Her chief communications officer, Lieutenant Min Javid, approached cautiously. "Admiral, the Council has made their decision. They've authorized the Death Fleet." Kira didn't look up immediately. She sat in the command chair, her elbows resting on her knees, her gaze fixed on the holographic display hovering in front of her. The alien fleet was already on the move, their sleek, shadow-like ships creeping ever closer to the inner solar system. They were less than 2 days from reaching Earth orbit. And now the Council had made their choice. "I assume they didn't waste much time debating," she finally said, her voice flat. She leaned back, the dim light casting sharp lines on her face. Min hesitated. "They debated plenty, Admiral. It just didn't take long for fear to outweigh the alternatives." Kira nodded slowly, but there was no satisfaction in the gesture. "Of course they did. It's easier to fear what we don't understand than to try and understand it." She stood and walked to the bridge's observation window. Through the armored viewport, Titan's hazy surface loomed below, its orange and brown atmosphere swirling lazily. Kira had fought to protect this moon during the solar uprising. She had seen war up close, seen what happened when fear turned into firepower. She hadn't asked to be given command of the Death Fleet. She had barely even believed in its existence until the Council had quietly contacted her years ago, placing her at the helm of something they called Earth's ultimate safeguard. Now, that safeguard was in her hands, and she didn't know if it would save humanity or damn it. The Death Fleet wasn't a simple collection of warships. It was a System A network of automated destroyers, antimatter warheads, cloaked battle platforms hidden in the asteroid belt, and the most advanced AI-driven weapons Earth had ever developed. It was the culmination of every paranoid thought humanity had ever had about the cosmos. And once it was unleashed, there was no calling it back. "Give me a status report," she said. Min motioned to the tactical display. "The fleet is mobilizing now. The primary battle groups are positioning themselves near Jupiter's orbit. Automated systems are on standby. The first wave will be ready to engage the alien fleet in 20 hours. And our support lines? Supply drones are en route from Luna Station, and the Mars defense platforms are locked into the grid." Kira stared at the tactical display, watching as her fleet's ships blinked into position on the holographic map. For all their power, they looked small. Tiny green dots compared to the ominous red markers that represented the alien invaders. Even knowing the firepower her fleet possessed, Kira couldn't shake the feeling that they were woefully outmatched. "Have we received anything from the alien fleet?" "Any attempt to communicate?" she asked. Min shook his head. No signals. No hails. No signs of response to our earlier messages. It's like they're just advancing. Kira felt the weight settle further on her shoulders. I don't like this. If they were planning to negotiate, they'd have done so by now. If they wanted to make a statement, we'd have heard it. Their silence dash, she gestured at the display dash, their silence says more than any broadcast ever could. They've already made up their minds. They're not coming to talk. She returned to her chair and stared at the command console, her fingers hovering over the controls. A single thought gnawed at her: what if we're wrong? What if this is all a mistake? But it was too late to back out now. The council had spoken, the fleet was moving, and she was the one who had to lead it. Whatever her personal reservations, whatever doubts churned in her mind, she had sworn an oath to defend Earth. And if the alien fleet meant harm, she would make sure humanity gave them a fight they would never forget. Admiral? Min prompted gently. She snapped out of her thoughts and straightened in her chair. Prepare the first wave for deployment. Once they're in range, we'll hit them hard and fast. I don't want to give them any time to adapt. Yes, ma'am. As Min relayed the orders, Kira took a long breath and steeled herself. The Death Fleet was now active, and the countdown to Earth's most desperate battle had begun. In the darkness beyond Mars, Earth's Death Fleet was an artificial constellation, its formation tight, its weapons primed. A lattice of automated drones, antimatter warheads, and manned battlecruisers waited, poised to meet the alien fleet head-on. Admiral Kira Danan stood at the center of the Ardent Star's command deck, her voice steady, her orders clear. Around her, officers moved quickly and silently, like clockwork. Through the forward viewport, the distant pinpricks of the alien vessels grew larger. They weren't mere ships, they were immense, angular structures that seemed to swallow light itself. Unlike Earth's designs, pragmatic, industrial, built for efficiency, these were almost surreal, as if sculpted by a civilization that understood the cosmos in a fundamentally different way. They moved as one, an unnerving, silent tide. Enemy vessels crossing the Phobos threshold, announced Lieutenant Min Javid, her voice tight. Estimated time to engagement, 23 minutes. Kira nodded, her hands gripping the armrests of her command chair. Activate the perimeter batteries. Bring all antimatter platforms to maximum readiness. No one fires until I give the order. The Death Fleet's automated systems responded instantaneously. Satellites hidden within the asteroid belt powered up, their shields snapping online. Swarms of drone fighters deployed from the larger cruisers, forming concentric rings around the central battle group. Antimatter warheads, Earth's most terrifying weapon, were armed, their launch protocols double and triple checked. As the alien fleet drew closer, their formation became clearer. They weren't a scattered, disorganized armada. Every ship moved in perfect synchronization, as if directed by a single, omnipresent mind. Earth's forces might have had the numbers, but the aliens had the precision. The alien ships didn't waver, didn't slow. They were steady, inevitable. The silence was oppressive. When the first shots were fired, they weren't Earth's. A shimmering wave of energy burst from the alien fleet's lead vessels. It wasn't like a human laser or a railgun. It was something else, an attack that didn't just damage its target, but seemed to disassemble it. Kira's screens lit up with alarms as a portion of the drone shield vanished, reduced to atoms in a single, terrible moment. Contact, shouted Min. Multiple losses in Sector 7. Their weapons are. Admiral, they're breaking down our ships at the molecular level. Shields up. Deploy countermeasures. Kira barked, her voice cutting through the rising tension. Target their lead vessels. I want all rail batteries focused on those coordinates. The Death Fleet returned fire. Hundreds of railguns, missile launchers, and directed energy weapons roared to life. The vacuum of space became a storm of destruction. Earth's drones surged forward, colliding with alien interceptors. The enemy fleet's front lines twisted and shimmered as their defenses absorbed the onslaught. Some alien ships faltered, their sleek black hulls shattering under the relentless barrage, but many more kept coming. "Admiral, secondary wave detected," men reported. More ships inbound from the outer perimeter. Kira's stomach clenched. She knew the Death Fleet couldn't hold against wave after wave of reinforcements. The longer this dragged on, the more Earth's forces would be overwhelmed. Her mind raced, analyzing the patterns, the gaps in the enemy's formation, searching for anything that could turn the tide. "Send out all remaining interceptors," she ordered. "And begin antimatter deployment procedures. We don't have the luxury of waiting." The bridge crew acknowledged her commands without hesitation. Deep within the ardent star, antimatter warheads began their final countdown. If there was a weapon that could level the playing field, it was these. But once deployed, there would be no going back. They would annihilate not just the enemy, but large swaths of space in the process. As the battle raged, Kira's sharp eyes caught a subtle shift in the alien formation. They were concentrating their forces on a single point directly in the center of Earth's defenses. It wasn't a random attack, it was coordinated, deliberate. The alien fleet wasn't just overwhelming Earth's ships. They were hurting them, funneling them into a trap. "They're collapsing our center," Kira muttered, more to herself than to her crew. She quickly turned to her tactical officer. "Run a full scan on the alien rearguard." "What do you see?" The officer hesitated before responding. "It's thinner than expected. Less reinforcement than the rest of the formation." A realization struck her. The alien ships weren't invincible, but their formation made them nearly so. If she could break their cohesion cut through the rear, disrupt their synchrony, there might be a chance. A desperate chance, but a chance nonetheless. "Recall the outer squadrons and reform them behind our line," she commanded. "We're going to punch through their rear guard. Admiral, if we pull back now, we'll lose the forward platforms," men began. "We'll lose everything if we let them collapse the center. Trust me. Execute the maneuver." Reluctantly, the crew obeyed. Earth's outer squadrons fell back and regrouped, forming a spearhead aimed directly at the alien fleet's rear. Kira watched the tactical display closely. The maneuver had to be timed perfectly. The alien fleet noticed the shift almost immediately. Their rear ships began to rotate, but not fast enough. "Now!" Kira shouted. "Hit them with everything we've got." Earth's forces surged forward, smashing into the weaker rear line. Antimatter warheads detonated, their blinding light swallowing the enemy vessels. The aliens' perfect formation broke. For the first time in the battle, they were reacting rather than controlling. The once impervious wave faltered. Their ships, no longer synchronized, began to collapse under the coordinated firepower of Earth's Death Fleet. It was a brief moment of hope, but the cost was unimaginable. The destruction was staggering: hundreds of Earth's ships lost, entire sectors of space reduced to radioactive debris. Kira's own command ship was badly damaged, its shields flickering, its hull groaning under the strain. But when the last alien ship disintegrated, leaving nothing but silence in its wake, she allowed herself a single breath of relief. The battle was over. The Death Fleet had done its job. But as Kira surveyed the aftermath, she felt no triumph. Earth had survived, but the victory had been one of desperation, not glory. The fleet was shattered. The price had been steep, and the question still loomed: why had the aliens come? What had they wanted? And most importantly, would they come again? Kira turned from the viewport and walked toward her quarters. Her crew was cheering faintly in the background, the sound muted, almost ghostly. She didn't share their relief. All she could think of was the signal that had started it all, and the terrible power she had just unleashed. "We've won the first battle," she thought, "but we may have lost something far more important in the process."